Close your eyes for just a moment. Take a deep breath and try to recall a very specific scent from your childhood. Perhaps it is the earthy aroma of wet dust after a sudden summer rain in your village. Or maybe it is the sweet, heavy fragrance of honeysuckle blooming over a neighbour's stone wall, mixed with the sharp scent of green olive oil soap. Can you hear the rhythmic clicking of worry beads, the komboloi, in the hands of the old men sitting outside the cafeneo? Welcome back to Greece. Today, we are going to take a journey back in time to the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. We are going to talk about 40 perfectly normal things from our past that might seem totally absurd or even unimaginable to the world today. But for us, these were the very things that made our childhood so deeply magical. Stay with me until the end, because the final memory we will share is one that is guaranteed to bring a warm, bittersweet tear to your eye. Before we begin our walk down these dusty memory lanes, we must remember how differently time flowed back then. In those golden decades, time was not something you chased, it was something you lived alongside. The days felt impossibly long, stretching out beneath the endless, bright blue Aegean sky. There was absolutely no rush. Waiting was not considered an inconvenience. It was a virtue, a completely natural part of our daily rhythm. We waited for the bread to bake. We waited for the mailman to bring news from afar. And we waited for Sunday to see our extended families. People today might look back at our lack of modern technology and think we lived a poorer life. But they could not be more wrong. What we lacked in screens and instant messages, we made up for in genuine, unfiltered human connection. Our lives were infinitely richer in sincerity, in looking people directly in the eyes, and in sharing our joys and our sorrows over a tiny cup of strong, dark coffee. We did not need to be constantly entertained, because simply being together was the greatest entertainment of all. Let us remember exactly how beautiful that was. Let us begin by remembering the daily arrival of the Iceman, the Pagopolio. In the sweltering, unforgiving heat of a Greek summer in the 1960s, before electric refrigerators hummed in every single kitchen, keeping food fresh was a serious daily challenge. Then you would hear the heavy, rumbling engine of his truck, or perhaps the steady clip-clop of his mule approaching your neighborhood. The Iceman would arrive carrying a massive, crystal-clear block of solid ice balanced directly on his shoulder, protected from his skin only by a thick, rough piece of burlap sack. Cold water would drip steadily down his back, leaving a dark, wet trail on his shirt under the scorching sun. He would use a heavy metal pick to chip away a piece just the right size for your family's wooden icebox. The sound of that metal striking the ice, that sharp, echoing crack, was the undeniable sound of summer relief. We children would gather around his truck like little sparrows, eagerly waiting for the small, broken shards of ice to fall to the dusty ground. We would snatch them up with our dirty hands and suck on them as if they were the most delicious candy in the entire world. Placing that fresh block into the zinc-lined wooden icebox meant we would have cool water to drink, and our precious feta cheese and tomatoes would not spoil. The Iceman was a vital part of our survival, a daily friend who brought a temporary, melting relief to our sun-baked lives. And now, let us recall the early morning ritual of the milkman, the galatas. Long before the sun had fully risen over the horizon, while a cool mist still clung to the olive groves and the narrow village streets, his journey began. You did not need an alarm clock in those days. You simply woke up to the gentle, musical clinking of thick glass bottles tapping against each other. He would travel through the neighborhoods, sometimes on a sturdy bicycle, sometimes leading a patient donkey laden with metal baskets. The milk he brought was completely raw, warm, and smelled deeply of the countryside. But bringing it inside was only the very first step of the ritual. Our mothers would immediately pour this fresh milk into a special aluminium pot to boil it on the stove. You had to stand there and watch it like a hawk, because the moment it began to boil, it would rise rapidly and spill over, filling the whole house with a burn smell. When it was successfully boiled and left to cool, a thick, rich layer of yellowish cream would form right on the top. For us children, scraping that warm cream off with a spoon or dipping a thick crust of freshly baked bread directly into the pot was a morning luxury that no modern, pasteurized supermarket milk could ever hope to replicate. It was a taste of pure, unadulterated comfort. Let us talk about the absolute center of neighborhood trust, the small corner grocery store, the Bacalico, and its famous little notebook, the tefteri. Stepping into the Bacalico was like stepping into a sanctuary of sensory delights. The air was always heavy with the combined scents of dried oregano, sharp cafalatiri cheese, salted cod resting in wooden crates, and the briny smell of olives scooped directly from large metal barrels. But the most important item in the entire store was not for sale. It was a worn, tattered little notebook kept right next to the heavy brass cash register. In a time when money was incredibly tight and monthly salaries barely stretched to the final week, this notebook was our lifeline. When a mother needed flour, sugar, or a little bit of coffee but had no drachmas left in her purse, the grocer would simply nod, take out his pencil, and write her name and the debt in the tefteri. There were no credit cards, no background checks, and absolutely no digital records. It was an entire economic system based entirely on looking a man in the eye and giving him your word. At the end of the month, when the paycheck finally arrived, the father would walk to the Bacalico, pay the balance, and the grocer would cross out the names with a thick stroke of his pencil, perhaps offering a small piece of lukumi to the children as a gesture of gratitude. It was a beautiful, dignified system of survival, built on profound community trust. Can you still hear the sweet, heart-wrenching melody of the laterna? In the bustling streets of Athens and Thessaloniki, the barrel piano was not just an instrument, it was a travelling theatre of emotion. The laterna was a heavy, wooden, beautifully decorated music box, always adorned with faded velvet, intricate lace, and framed black and white photographs of beautiful women or famous singers. The old man who operated it, the laternazis, would pull it through the steep, winding streets, stopping at a busy corner to begin his performance. With a steady, rhythmic turn of the heavy iron crank, the pin cylinder inside would begin to pluck the strings, releasing a cascade of metallic, trembling notes that echoed off the concrete apartment buildings. He played old rembetika and romantic waltzes. As the music drifted up to the balconies, women would pause their sweeping, lean over the iron railings, and wrap a few coins in a small piece of paper, dropping it down to the street below to thank the musician. The laterna brought a profound sense of melancholy and joy directly to our doorsteps. It was a time when music was not something you listened to privately through headphones, but an event that spilled out into the streets, forcing an entire neighborhood to pause, to listen, and to feel the music together. I want you to remember the absolute magic of sleeping outside during the stifling summer nights. In the heart of August, when the concrete walls of the houses absorbed the sun's fire all day long and radiated it back into the bedrooms at night, sleeping indoors was simply impossible. There was no air conditioning to save us. Instead, we had a wonderful, communal solution. Entire families would carry their heavy, striped cotton mattresses out onto the balconies or up the narrow stairs to the flat rooftops, the terrazza. Mothers would carefully drape delicate, white mosquito nets over the sleeping areas, creating tiny, ghostly tents in the darkness. Lying there in the cool night breeze, you could hear the hushed, whispering voices of your neighbors doing the exact same thing on the adjacent rooftops. You could hear the distant, lonely bark of a stray dog and the soft static of a radio playing a late-night broadcast somewhere down the street. We children would lie flat on our backs, feeling the rough cotton sheets against our skin, and stare up at a sky that was completely overflowing with brilliant, glittering stars. We would trace constellations with our fingers until our eyelids grew heavy. We thought we were just trying to escape the terrible heat, but looking back, we were experiencing the most profound, peaceful freedom. Let us take a moment to remember the iconic blue school uniform, the podia. If you grew up in the 60s or 70s, you intimately know the rustle of that stiff, dark blue fabric. Every single morning, boys and girls alike would put on these uniforms. For the girls, it was a blue pinafore that reached below the knees, always adorned with a perfectly crisp, detachable white lace collar. For the boys, it was a simple blue shirt or tunic. This was not just a piece of clothing, it was a powerful symbol of absolute equality. When we walked into that crowded classroom, the daughter of the wealthy doctor and the son of the poorest farmer looked exactly the same. The uniform hid our economic differences and united us. Our mothers took immense pride in keeping those white collars blindingly clean, washing them by hand and ironing them with heavy metal irons heated on the stove. We would inevitably ruin their hard work by the end of the day, coming home with blue ink stains from our fountain pens leaking onto the fabric, or with knees covered in grey dust from playing football in the schoolyard. Taking off the podia at the end of the school day marked the official beginning of our afternoon freedom, but putting it on every morning gave us a sense of belonging to something much larger than ourselves. Now, let us transport ourselves to the enchanting world of the outdoor summer cinema, the Theranos cinema. Going to the movies in the summer was an entirely different universe than the dark, silent, air-conditioned theatres of today. The Therano was usually just an empty dirt lot wedged tightly between two tall apartment buildings, surrounded by whitewashed walls, heavily draped in blooming jasmine and climbing honeysuckle. As you walked in, your shoes crunched loudly on the white gravel. The air was thick with the scent of those flowers, mingling perfectly with the smell of roasted pumpkin seeds, the passatempos, and the sweet aroma of mosquito coils burning slowly in the corners. We would sit on uncomfortable folding canvas director's chairs, waiting eagerly for the sky to turn completely black so the magic could begin. You could actually see the thick, dusty beam of light shooting from the projector room through the humid air to hit the large white wall. We watched Aliki Vujuklaki and Dimitris Papamichael laugh and sing, and we laughed and cried right along with them. And if a scene was particularly romantic or sad, you could hear the collective sighs of the audience, harmonizing with the loud, rhythmic chirping of the cicadas in the trees above. It was cinema under the open sky, an experience that touched the soul. Do you remember when making a simple telephone call was a major neighborhood event? Very few households had their own private landline. Instead, the center of all local communication was the neighborhood kiosk, the periptero. This tiny, brightly colored wooden box, sitting proudly on the sidewalk, was the beating heart of our community. Attached to its side, with a short, tangled cord, was a heavy, black, rotary dial telephone. When you needed to make a call, you had to walk down the street and stand in line behind your neighbors. There was absolutely no privacy. As you loudly shouted into the receiver to be heard over the passing traffic, the kiosk owner, the peripterers, and everyone else waiting in line learned all about your personal business. The peripterers himself was the ultimate keeper of secrets. He took messages for people who were not home, shouting up to their balconies when an important call came through. He sold us single cigarettes when we could not afford a whole pack, old newspapers, and sweet caramels. The act of inserting those heavy metallic drachma coins into the phone slot, hearing them clunk down into the machine, and spinning that stiff plastic dial, made calling someone feel like a deliberate, significant, and very expensive commitment. Let us bring back the sharp, metallic memory of the knife sharpener, the Aconiaris. His arrival was always announced not by a voice, but by a very specific, high-pitched ringing of a brass bell attached to the handlebars of his old, sturdy bicycle. When that sound echoed through the neighborhood, a flurry of activity would begin. Mothers and grandmothers would rush into their kitchens, hastily gathering up all their dull carving knives, large, heavy cleavers, and rusted fabric scissors. They would hurry down the stairs and out into the street to meet him. The Aconiaris would flip down the heavy kickstand of his bicycle, which ingeniously transformed it into a completely stationary workstation. He would pump the pedals with his feet, not to move forward, but to rapidly spin the large, grey, circular sharpening stone mounted over his back tire. As he carefully pressed the dull steel blades against the spinning, wet stone, a brilliant, terrifying shower of bright orange sparks would fly into the air, accompanied by a loud, grinding shriek. The air would suddenly smell intensely of hot metal and wet dust. We children stood in a tight circle, completely mesmerized by the danger and the magic of his craft. He took the blunt, useless tools of our daily lives, and with the power of his own two legs, made them sharp and dangerous once again. Think back to the monumental, exhausting task of washing clothes in the traditional basin, the scaffy. Before the magical hum of the automatic washing machine entered our bathrooms, doing the laundry was an intensely physical, all-day endeavor. The scaffy was a heavy, ribbed zinc basin, usually set up in the courtyard, on the balcony, or right next to the village spring. Our mothers and grandmothers would start by boiling massive pots of water on the stove and carrying them carefully outside. They used large, rough blocks of green olive oil soap that left a very distinct, clean, earthy scent on their hands. Every single piece of clothing, from thick wool blankets to delicate undergarments, had to be rigorously scrubbed by hand against the metal ridges of the basin. The women would bend over for hours, their knuckles turning red and raw from the hot water and the friction. Yet, despite the back-breaking labor, this was often a deeply communal time. Women would wash their clothes side by side in the village square, exchanging news, singing old folk songs, and sharing their burdens. And finally, when the clothes were wrung out by twisting them tightly with both hands, they were hung on long lines under the intense Greek sun, falling asleep at night on sheets that smelled of that green soap and pure sunshine is a luxury that no modern fabric softener can ever reproduce. Let us savor the sweet, fleeting memory of the traveling ice cream man, the pagotatsis. On the longest, hottest afternoons of the summer, when the entire country seemed to have fallen asleep during the quiet hours of the mesimeri, a magical sound would break the silence. It was the cheerful, rhythmic ringing of a small handbell. Instantly, children would abandon their toys and rush out of their houses, clutching sweaty coins tightly in their palms. We would run down the street, chasing the bright white, three-wheeled cart being pushed or pedaled by the pagotatsis. He wore a crisp, white apron and a small cap. When he finally stopped, he would lift the heavy metal lid of his cart, releasing a thick, mystical cloud of freezing white vapor from the dry ice inside. The choices were remarkably simple, nothing like the endless menus of today. There was usually only vanilla, chocolate, or a bright pink ice cream flavored with delicate rose water. He would scoop the hard, icy treat into a small, fragile cone, or perhaps press it between two thin, papery wafers. We would eat it frantically as it melted down our hands, making our fingers sticky and sweet. The pagotatsis did not just sell a dessert, he sold a moment of pure, frosty joy in the middle of a baking, relentless summer. We must not forget the beautiful, lifelong dedication required to prepare a young woman's dowry, the prika. In those days, a girl's marriage preparation began almost from the moment she was born. In the corner of every bedroom sat a large, heavy wooden chest, the casella, smelling intensely of dried lavender, mothballs, and camphor wood. Over the course of 15 or 20 years, this chest was slowly, lovingly filled. Young girls, sitting close to their mothers and grandmothers in the fading afternoon light, would spend countless hours embroidering thick cotton pillowcases, knitting intricate wool blankets, and crocheting miles of delicate white lace for tablecloths and curtains. Every single stitch was a prayer for a happy future, a testament to patience and family pride. A woman's worth was often judged by the height and quality of the linens stacked proudly in her new home on the day she was married. The physical objects were beautiful, yes, but the true value of the prika was the time spent making it. It was thousands of quiet hours of women sitting together, passing down ancient techniques, sharing stories of their own youths, and weaving their hopes directly into the fabric. Today, we simply buy towels at a department store, but we have lost the profound magic of creating our own heritage by hand. Let us recall the vibrant, messy, and intensely fragrant ritual of making homemade tomato paste, the pelter. In late August, when the tomatoes were overripe, incredibly cheap, and practically bursting with dark red juice, the great production began. Families would buy massive, woven baskets full of these tomatoes. The courtyard or the balcony would turn into a bustling, messy factory. The women would carefully wash the tomatoes, slice them open, and spend hours vigorously rubbing them through fine metal sieves to separate the sweet pulp from the bitter seeds and the skins. Their hands and aprons would be stained completely red. The thick, juicy pulp was then heavily salted and spread out onto large, flat wooden boards or shallow metal trays. These trays were carried up to the roof and left directly under the blazing, punishing summer sun for several days. We had to carefully cover them with thin cheesecloth to keep the bees away. Slowly, the intense heat would evaporate all the water, leaving behind a dark, thick, intensely flavoured crimson paste. Storing that paste in glass jars meant capturing the very essence of the Greek summer. All winter long, adding just one small spoonful of that handmade pelter to a pot of lentil soup would instantly fill the kitchen with the smell of August sunshine. I invite you to remember the absolute, unbreakable sanctity of the Sunday family lunch. The Kyriakatiko Trapezi. This was not just a meal, it was a weekly religious event that governed our entire existence. No matter where you were, no matter what you were doing with your friends, you had to be washed, dressed in your good clothes, and sitting at the family table by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There were absolutely no exceptions. The house would smell incredibly rich, usually with the heavy, mouth-watering aroma of a leg of lamb roasting slowly in the oven with lemon, garlic, and soft, buttery potatoes. The table was always covered with a spotless, freshly ironed white tablecloth. There were no individual plates prepared in the kitchen. Instead, the large, black, battered metal roasting pan was placed right in the dead center of the table. We all ate together, reaching across one another for a piece of crusty bread to dip into the rich oil at the bottom of the pan. The adults would pour cheap, strong Retsina wine from a tin jug, and the conversations, often loud and passionate arguments about politics or football, would echo through the house. The Sunday table was the anchor of our week, a forced but deeply loved communion that kept the family tightly woven together in a rapidly changing world. Let us bring back the image of the street photographer, the planodios photographos. Before every person carried a high-definition camera in their pocket, capturing a family memory was a rare, deliberate, and almost magical event. If you walked through Syntagma Square in Athens or along the promenade in Thessaloniki, you would see him standing there. He operated a large, mysterious wooden box mounted on a sturdy wooden tripod. The camera looked like a piece of vintage furniture. When a family approached, they would carefully arrange themselves, smoothing their hair and standing completely, stiffly still. Because film was incredibly expensive and there were no second chances, the photographer would pull a heavy black cloth over his head to look through the lens, shouting at the children not to blink. After the loud click of the shutter, the true magic happened. His wooden camera was actually a portable darkroom. He would reach his hands into special black sleeves attached to the box, dipping the exposed paper directly into hidden buckets of strong-smelling chemicals. A few minutes later, he would pull out a dripping wet black and white photograph, waving it in the warm air to dry. Holding that damp piece of paper, watching your own face slowly appear on it, felt like witnessing an absolute miracle. Think back to the raw, completely unsupervised joy of playing in the dirt streets of our neighborhoods. In those decades, the streets did not belong to speeding cars. They belonged entirely to the children. From the moment we finished our homework until the sun went down, we lived outside. There were no organized playdates, no safety helmets, and no hovering parents. We came home with scraped, bloody knees, shirts stained with mud, and pockets filled with dust and precious glass marbles. We played elaborate games of hide and seek that spanned entire blocks, hiding behind rusted oil barrels and jumping over low stone walls. We played football in empty lots, using balls made out of tightly rolled rags tied with string, because real leather balls were far too expensive. The only clock we ever paid attention to was the streetlights. When the sky turned a deep purple and the yellow street lamps flickered on with a quiet hum, it was the universal, undisputed signal that the day was over. You would suddenly hear the chorus of mothers stepping out onto their balconies, shouting the names of their children, calling them home for dinner. That fading light and the distant sound of your mother's voice meant it was finally time to wash your filthy hands and rest. Let us pause to remember the quiet intimacy of gathering around the radio on a Sunday evening. Long before televisions dominated our living rooms with flashing colours and loud commercials, the radio was our primary window to the outside world. It was a large, heavy, polished wooden box that sat proudly on a doily in the corner of the room. When you turned the heavy plastic knob, you had to wait for the glass vacuum tubes inside to slowly warm up, glowing with a soft, warm orange light. First, there was the crackle of static, and then a deep, theatrical voice would fill the room. On Sundays, the whole family would sit in absolute silence to listen to radio theatre, the teatro sto radiofono. We would stare blankly at the wooden speaker, letting the incredible voice actors and the primitive sound effects paint the most vivid, terrifying, or romantic pictures inside our minds. Or the men of the house would huddle close to the device, straining to hear the frantic commentary of a Sunday football match broadcasting live from a distant, noisy stadium. The radio demanded our full attention and our imagination. We were not passively watching, we were actively creating the world in our heads, connected to the entire country by invisible, crackling waves of sound. Do you remember the satisfying, heavy weight of the drachma coins in your pocket? The money we used back then was not just a means of transaction, it was physically beautiful. We had large, solid, silver-coloured coins, stamped with gorgeous images of ancient Greek owls, majestic sailing ships, and the profiles of stern kings. A 20 drachma coin felt substantial in your hand, like a real piece of treasure. For a child, holding a single 10 drachma coin meant immense power. It meant you could buy a warm sesame kaluri, a small bottle of cold soda, or a handful of roasted chickpeas. Because money was so hard to come by, we treated it with profound respect. We saved our coins in small, heavy clay piggy banks, the kubaras. These banks had no rubber stopper at the bottom. Once the coin went through the tiny slot, it was gone. The only way to get your money back was to wait until the clay pig was completely full and impossibly heavy, and then take a hammer and violently smash it to pieces on the floor. Counting those shiny coins amidst the shards of broken clay, feeling the reward of months of patience, was a lesson in the true value of saving that modern plastic cards can never teach. Let us travel back to the remote mountain villages and remember the overwhelming excitement of the travelling cinema. In places where there was no permanent theatre, and sometimes not even paved roads, the arrival of the cinema man was a festival. He would drive his dusty van into the main square, the platea, just as the sun was setting. He would stretch a large, plain white bedsheet tightly against the rough stone wall of the local church, or the cafaneo. Everyone in the village, from the youngest toddlers to the oldest grandmothers dressed in black, would carry their own wooden, straw-bottomed chairs from their houses to the square. As the noisy, mechanical clatter of the heavy projector began, throwing a brilliant beam of light through the dark, insect-filled air, a hush would fall over the crowd. For 2 hours, the harsh reality of village life disappeared. We watched epic dramas, Greek comedies, and tales of romance. If the film broke, which it often did, the crowd would groan and whistle loudly until the projectionist hurriedly taped it back together. We laughed together, we wept openly together, and we shared a collective dream projected onto a simple white sheet in the middle of nowhere. Finally, let us remember the beautiful, necessary ritual of sharing the neighbourhood oven, the fornus. In the 1960s, most city apartments and small village houses did not have large electric ovens in their tiny kitchens. They only had small stovetops. So, cooking a large Sunday roast, or baking the traditional Easter cookies, the koularakia, required the help of the local baker. Early on Sunday morning, mothers would carefully prepare their massive metal roasting pans, filling them with meat, potatoes, thick olive oil, and herbs. Then, usually it was the children's job to carefully carry this heavy, sloshing pan down the street to the neighbourhood bakery. The baker would take your pan and slide it deep into his massive, wood-fired oven, alongside 20 other identical pans from your neighbours. The challenge was recognising your own pan when you went back to pick it up a few hours later. You had to memorise the specific dents on the metal edge, walking back home carrying that incredibly hot pan, using old rags to protect your hands, surrounded by the heavenly, mouth-watering smell of roasted garlic and lemon bubbling in the fat was a journey of pure anticipation. The baker cooked for the whole street, turning Sunday lunch into a deeply shared communal experience. As we open our eyes and return to the present day, with our fast internet, our digital screens, and our instant deliveries, we realize something profound. When we feel this deep, heavy ache of nostalgia, we are not truly mourning the loss of the wooden icebox, the heavy zinc washing basin, or the dusty dirt roads. What we are really grieving for is the way those things made us feel. We miss the profound sense of community, the unwavering trust of a neighborhood that felt like a family, and the slow, deliberate pace of a time when people actually looked each other in the eye. We miss the days when a simple piece of bread dipped in fresh milk could make us feel like the richest people on earth. More than anything, we simply miss being young when the world was smaller, but our hearts felt so much bigger. Thank you so very much for taking this beautiful journey down memory lane with me today. If this video brought a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to our channel for more nostalgic journeys into the past. And now, I want to ask you, out of all these beautiful things we talked about, which one gave you the strongest memory of your own childhood? Please, tell me your story in the comments below. I promise to read every single one.